Every banana-flavored candy you've ever tasted, every banana popsicle, every piece of banana taffy, tastes nothing like the banana sitting on your kitchen counter right now. You've probably noticed this. You bite into banana Laffy Taffy, and the flavor is strong, sweet, almost perfume-like. Then you eat an actual banana, and it's mild, a little starchy, nothing like the candy at all. And most people just accept that. They figure artificial flavors are always a little off, the same way grape candy doesn't taste like grapes, and they move on with their day. That was the assumption for decades. That was 1960. By 1965, every grocery store in America had quietly swapped out the banana they'd been selling for almost 100 years and replaced it with a completely different fruit that just happened to look similar enough that nobody questioned it. No announcement, no label change, just a different banana in the same spot on the shelf, and an entire generation grew up never knowing the switch had happened. The original was called the Gros Michel, and the story of how it disappeared is one of the biggest agricultural collapses of the 20th century, a catastrophe so total that it reshaped global trade, toppled the economies of entire countries, and left behind a clue hiding in plain sight in every candy aisle in the world. It was 1876, and the United States was throwing itself a birthday party. The Philadelphia Centennial Exposition was the first World's Fair ever held in America, a sprawling celebration of the country's 100th anniversary that drew over 10 million visitors through its gates. That was roughly 1 out of every 5 Americans alive at the time. The exposition had everything from Alexander Graham Bell's brand new telephone to enormous steam engines, but tucked inside the horticultural hall, among 40 acres of exotic tropical plant displays, was something most fairgoers had never seen before in their lives: a banana plant, a real, living banana plant, with actual fruit hanging from it. The thing was so popular that a guard had to be posted next to it full-time because visitors kept trying to rip off pieces of bark and leaves as souvenirs. Meanwhile, a local grocer was selling individual bananas nearby, each one wrapped in tinfoil like a piece of fine jewelry, for 10 cents a piece. That was a full hour's wages for most working people at the time. And visitors ate them with a knife and fork because nobody in Philadelphia had any idea how you were supposed to eat one. That banana, the one wrapped in tinfoil and treated like a luxury from another world, was a Gros Michel. The name is French for Fat Michael, but everyone in the trade just called it Big Mike. And within 20 years of that exposition, Big Mike would become the most consumed fruit in the Western Hemisphere, the center of a global industry worth billions and the entire economic engine of half a dozen countries. What happened next changed the fruit we eat, the flavor we taste in candy, and the way entire nations were governed. And almost nobody alive today remembers any of it. The timing of Big Mike's rise was perfect. Refrigerated shipping technology was coming into its own in the late 1800s, and a handful of American businessmen saw an opportunity. The most important of them was Minor Cooper Keith, a railroad builder who'd been laying track through Costa Rica and realized the banana plantations along his rail lines were worth more than the railroad itself. In 1899, his operation merged with the Boston Fruit Company to form the United Fruit Company, and the banana business went from a cottage industry to a corporate empire practically overnight. Within a few years, United Fruit controlled 75% of all banana imports into the United States. They held over 200,000 acres of land across Central America. They operated more than 100 miles of private railroad. They had a fleet of 36 refrigerated steamships, painted white and nicknamed the Great White Fleet, shuttling bananas from the tropics to American ports. And every single banana on every single one of those ships was a Gros Michel. The reasons were completely practical. Big Mike had a thick, resilient peel that could survive weeks of rough handling in a cargo hold without splitting or bruising. The bunches grew dense and compact, easy to stack and ship. You could leave them sitting unrefrigerated for 3 to 4 weeks, and they'd still be perfectly good to eat. Try that with the banana sitting on your counter right now, and you'll have a brown puddle in about 7 days. And the flavor was something else entirely. People who've actually tasted a Gros Michel describe it as richer, sweeter, and creamier than any Cavendish you've had in your life. The banana taste is deeper and more intense, with a smooth, almost custard-like texture. There's a slight tartness when the peel still has a touch of green, and that mellows into pure, concentrated sweetness as it ripens to full yellow. A grower in Hawaii who still cultivates them described the flavor as candy-like, with lingering sweet, floral notes that the modern grocery store banana just doesn't have. For about 50 years, this was the banana. Not a banana, the banana. The only banana most Americans had ever seen, tasted, or even knew existed. There are over 1,000 varieties of banana in the world, but United Fruit used aggressive marketing to convince an entire continent that their one variety was the only one worth eating. When someone in 1930 slipped on a banana peel in a slapstick comedy, that was a Gros Michel peel, and that slapstick gag actually made more sense with a Gros Michel than it does with a Cavendish, because Big Mike's thicker, heavier peel really was slippery enough to send someone flying on a sidewalk. When families ordered banana splits at the ice cream counter, those were Gros Michel bananas. When doctors recommended bananas for babies and for digestive health, they were talking about a fruit with a completely different nutritional density and texture than the one we feed our kids today. The banana had become so central to American daily life that by the 1920s, the United States was consuming more bananas per person than any other fruit except apples. United Fruit had negotiated extraordinary deals with Central American governments to make this happen. In 1901, Guatemala granted them 170,000 hectares of land, exclusive railroad rights, control of the country's main port, and a 99-year tax exemption. The company essentially ran these countries as private operations, and the people working the plantations were paid wages that kept them in poverty. In 1928, when workers at a United Fruit plantation in Colombia tried to organize a strike, the company's allies opened fire. The number of people killed in what became known as the Banana Massacre has never been confirmed. Gabriel Garcia Marquez later wrote about it in 100 Years of Solitude. All of this, the corporate empire, the political influence, the reshaped economies of half a dozen nations, rested on a single variety of fruit. And there was a problem growing in the soil underneath all those plantations. A problem that everyone in the industry knew about and kept trying to outrun. What comes next is the part that, looking back, seems almost inevitable. Every Gros Michel banana on the planet was a clone, not a relative, not a similar variety, a genetic copy. Commercial bananas are sterile. They don't produce viable seeds the way an apple or an orange does. They reproduce asexually through cuttings from existing plants, each new shoot genetically identical to the one it came from. So every Big Mike growing in every field in Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama, Guatemala, and across the entire Caribbean was the exact same organism, repeated across millions of acres of monoculture farmland. No crop rotation, no buffer species between fields, no genetic variation of any kind. If you've ever gardened, you probably already see the problem. Genetic diversity is the immune system of agriculture. When you plant 10 different tomato varieties in your backyard, a blight that kills one might leave the other 9 standing. When you plant one variety across an entire continent, a single disease that can crack that variety's defenses has a clear path from the first infected plant to the last one on Earth. There's nothing to slow it down, no resistant neighbor to act as a firewall, no genetic variation that might give some plants a fighting chance. When you grow a single genetic line across an entire hemisphere with nothing to break the chain, you're not farming, you're building a fuse. All it takes is one spark. The spark had a name, Fusarium oxysporum, a soil-borne fungus. The specific strain that attacked bananas became known as Panama disease, named for the country where its effects were first documented in the 1890s. But nobody panicked at first. Banana plantations were vast, and Central America had seemingly endless forests to clear. When one field got infected, United Fruit would abandon it, burn the sick plants, bulldoze more rainforest, and plant fresh Gros Michel somewhere else. For a while, that strategy worked. It was brutal and wasteful, but it kept the bananas flowing. The problem was that Panama disease doesn't behave like most crop blights. This fungus doesn't attack the leaves or the fruit where you can see it and cut it out. It enters through the roots, invisible, and colonizes the vascular tissue inside the plant, the internal plumbing that carries water and nutrients up through the stem. It chokes the plant from the inside. The leaves yellow and wilt. The thick pseudostem at the base splits open, and the interior is black with rot. The plant dies. It can never produce another banana. And then comes the part that turned a bad disease into a permanent catastrophe. Once the fusarium fungus gets into the soil, it doesn't leave. Not after a year, not after a decade. Researchers believe contaminated soil can remain hostile to Gros Michel plants for decades, possibly indefinitely. There is no chemical treatment that kills it. You can't spray it. You can't flush it. You can't sterilize the ground. An infected field isn't resting. It's gone. Every plantation the industry abandoned was an acre of farmland permanently removed from banana production. This is the lesson that matters if you grow anything in your own yard. And it's worth sitting with for a second. The fusarium fungus spread through contaminated soil, on workers' boots, on farm equipment, in drainage water, even on the tires of trucks moving between plantations. A microscopic amount of infected dirt was enough to destroy an entire field. And because every Gros Michel was genetically identical, the fungus didn't need to adapt or evolve. One successful infection strategy worked on every banana plant on Earth. The banana companies tried everything. They flooded infected fields trying to drown the fungus. They experimented with chemical soil treatments, including a copper-based mixture called Bordeaux that turned workers' skin blue, destroyed their sense of smell, and killed an unknown number of laborers. They tried building drainage systems and quarantine zones around healthy plantations. They tried physically removing infected plants and burning them. They tried leaving fields fallow for years, hoping the fungus would die off. It didn't. Every attempt failed because you cannot fight a soil pathogen that lives in the ground permanently and spreads on anything that touches dirt. And the speed of the spread was terrifying. A worker walking from an infected field to a clean one could carry enough fungal spores on his boots to doom the entire healthy plantation. A truck driving between two farms did the same thing on its tires. Drainage water running downhill from a sick field into a healthy one would carry the infection with it. The fungus traveled faster than any quarantine could contain it. By the 1920s, banana shortages were hitting American consumers. In 1923, a novelty song called "Yes, We Have No Bananas" became the #1 hit in the country, sitting on top of the charts for 5 weeks straight. The song was inspired by a real fruit vendor who kept running out of bananas to sell. It became a cultural sensation. People sang it on the radio, in vaudeville shows, in their kitchens. And most of them had no idea the shortages behind the joke were being caused by a fungal plague systematically burning through plantations across an entire continent. The industry kept moving, kept clearing forest, kept planting on new ground. But by the 1950s, they were running out of room. Panama disease had spread to nearly every major banana-growing region in the Western tropics. The economic damage reached an estimated $2.3 billion in the currency of the time. Adjusted for inflation, that's over $18 billion. Central American nations that had built their entire economies around banana exports watched those economies crumble. These countries had become so dependent on this single crop and so dominated by the companies that traded it that writers coined the term banana republics to describe them. By 1965, the Gros Michel was declared commercially extinct. Not biologically extinct, an important distinction we'll come back to, but commercially, as far as the global fruit trade was concerned, Big Mike was finished. The banana that had fed America for the better part of a century, the banana that defined what the word banana meant to hundreds of millions of people, was pulled from every grocery shelf in every city in the country. The industry needed a replacement, and they needed it immediately. They found one. You're eating it right now. The Cavendish banana was never anyone's first choice. Most growers considered it an inferior product, and consumers who remembered Big Mike agreed. The peel is thinner and more fragile, bruising easily during transport. The bunches are looser and harder to pack efficiently. The flavor is milder, less complex, and less distinctly banana than the Gros Michel. It doesn't keep nearly as well without refrigeration. The companies had to redesign their entire shipping infrastructure to handle it. They built cardboard packaging plants because you couldn't just stack Cavendish bunches in a ship's hold the way you could with the sturdy Gros Michel. They installed overhead cable systems called air wires to carry the delicate fruit from plantation to port without crushing it. Every step of the supply chain had to be rebuilt from scratch. But the Cavendish had one quality that overrode every single objection. It was resistant to Panama disease race 1. That was the entire audition. Not tastes better, not ships better, not grows in more climates or produces bigger yields. Just doesn't die from the same fungus. Given the choice between an inferior banana and no banana at all, the industry chose the inferior banana, and the world went along with it because most consumers didn't know another option had ever existed. By the late 1960s, every banana traded by the United Fruit Company was a Cavendish. The transition happened so quietly that an entire generation grew up eating Cavendish bananas without ever knowing there had been a different banana before them. Today, the Cavendish accounts for over 95% of all banana exports worldwide. When you walk into any grocery store on the planet and pick up a banana, you are almost certainly holding a Cavendish. It's a universal product, as standardized as a can of Coca-Cola, and just as disconnected from the original version of the thing it replaced. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. I cover food history, backyard growing, and the stories behind the things we eat every week. By now, you're probably thinking about the candy aisle again, and you should be, because the science connects directly to the taste in your mouth. The chemical compound primarily responsible for banana flavor is called isoamyl acetate, sometimes called banana oil. It occurs naturally in all bananas and in a lot of other ripening fruits, and even in some alcoholic beverages. But the concentration varies dramatically depending on the variety. The Gros Michel contains significantly higher levels of isoamyl acetate than the Cavendish. That stronger concentration is exactly what gave Big Mike its deeper, more intense, unmistakable banana flavor. That rich, almost tropical sweetness that hits you immediately and lingers. The Cavendish has isoamyl acetate too, but at lower levels, mixed with a more complex and subtle blend of other flavor compounds. The result is a milder, less punchy taste that most people today just think of as banana. They have no frame of reference for what a banana used to taste like, so the Cavendish flavor is the only one they've ever known. Isoamyl acetate was also one of the very first chemical compounds used in artificial flavoring that was later confirmed to exist in the actual fruit. Food scientists isolated it in the 19th century, learned to synthesize it cheaply, and started putting it in candy, popsicles, ice cream, milkshakes, and just about everything else that needed to taste like banana. It became the standard banana flavor compound in the food industry, and it has never been updated or reformulated. The same molecule that food chemists picked over 100 years ago is still the one in your banana Laffy Taffy today. The full story has a wrinkle that's worth mentioning. Flavor historian Nadia Berenstein has pointed out that artificial banana flavoring may have actually predated the Gros Michel's widespread availability in the American market. Americans in some regions may have tasted artificial banana flavor before they'd ever eaten a real banana. So it's not quite as simple as scientists copied the Gros Michel. It's more that the synthetic compound and the Gros Michel happen to share the same dominant flavor molecule. And the Gros Michel had it in much higher concentrations than the banana we eat now. Either way, the result is the same. When you unwrap a piece of banana candy today, you're tasting something much closer to the banana your great-grandparents ate every day than the banana sitting in your kitchen. The candy isn't the fake. The grocery store banana is the substitute. Now here's the part that most videos about this topic leave out. And it's the part that should concern anyone who eats bananas, which is pretty much all of us. The banana industry solved its Gros Michel crisis by doing exactly what you'd expect from an industry that doesn't learn from its own history. They took the Cavendish, a single clone, and they planted it as a monoculture across every major banana-growing region on the planet. Same strategy, same vulnerability, different banana. In 1970, a new strain of Panama disease showed up in Taiwan, this time in a Cavendish plantation. Scientists named it Tropical Race 4. It attacks Cavendish the same way the original strain attacked Gros Michel, through the roots, into the vascular system, choking the plant from the inside. No chemical cure. Contaminated soil stays infected for decades. And TR4 can infect up to 80% of all banana varieties currently in cultivation, not just the Cavendish. By the early 2000s, Taiwan's banana industry had been gutted. Out of 50,000 hectares of banana plantations, only 6,000 remained. The disease spread to other parts of Southeast Asia, then to Africa. Then, in 2019, it was detected in Colombia, right in the heart of Latin America's banana export belt. In September 2025, Ecuador confirmed its arrival. Ecuador is the world's largest banana exporter, shipping nearly 6 million metric tons a year, roughly a third of the entire global trade. The disease has now been confirmed in 23 countries. It is still moving. Scientists are working on resistant varieties. A research team in Australia has developed transgenic Cavendish bananas, using a resistance gene from a wild diploid banana, and those plants are in their second round of field trials in the Northern Territory. The results from the first trial were promising, with 2 lines of modified Cavendish remaining completely disease-free over 3 years. But getting a transgenic banana from a field trial to a commercial plantation to a grocery store shelf involves years of regulatory approval, scaling up production, and convincing an industry that moves slowly to move fast. And the fungus isn't waiting for any of that. The race is real. Bananas are the most widely eaten fruit on the planet, and the global trade depends almost entirely on a single variety that is now under direct threat from a pathogen with no cure. More than 400 million people worldwide depend on bananas and plantains as a staple food, not a snack. For them, losing the banana isn't an inconvenience. It's a food security crisis. The Cavendish could face the same fate as the Gros Michel. The same type of fungus, the same monoculture vulnerability, the same absence of a cure. The industry replaced one clone with another clone and ran the same playbook, and the same ending is now in view. But there's a strange consolation buried in all of this. The Gros Michel isn't actually dead. Commercially extinct, yes. You won't find one at your local supermarket. Dole doesn't sell them. Del Monte doesn't sell them. No major grower produces them for the export market. But Big Mike never completely vanished from the earth. Small farmers, hobbyists, and backyard growers have kept the variety alive on uninfected soil all over the world, quietly, for over 60 years. In Hawaii, it goes by the name Bluefield's banana. In Cuba and Puerto Rico, they call it the Johnson banana. Specialty growers in Florida cultivate small batches using permaculture methods on clean soil and sell them through online vendors. You can buy a Gros Michel plant from nurseries that source their stock from USDA specimens preserved in plant banks specifically designed to save threatened varieties. If you live in USDA hardiness zones 9 through 11 and your soil hasn't been contaminated with fusarium, you can grow one in your own backyard. The trees get tall, usually 15 to 20 feet, so they're not going to work in a container on your patio. They want full sun or partial shade, high humidity, and rich, well-drained soil. The pseudostem is narrower than some other banana varieties, so they can be more vulnerable to wind blowdown than, say, a dwarf Cavendish, and you'll want to think about that if you're in a hurricane zone. But on clean ground, in the right climate, with regular watering and some decent mulch, a Gros Michel will produce fruit that tastes the way bananas are supposed to taste. Technically, a banana plant isn't even a tree. It's an evergreen perennial herb. That trunk is actually a pseudostem made of tightly packed leaf layers. The plant reproduces by sending up suckers, small clone shoots from the base, which means once you have one healthy Gros Michel established, it will keep producing new plants on its own. One plant becomes a small grove if you let it, and every banana it produces is a direct link to the fruit that Americans ate for 100 years before the industry abandoned it. Think about what that means for a second. The commercial banana industry declared the Gros Michel dead in the 1960s and moved on. They never looked back. They never tried to reintroduce it, never invested in finding resistant strains, never considered that the fruit they'd abandoned was the one customers actually preferred. They optimized for logistics and disease resistance and accepted the flavor loss as a cost of doing business. And for 60 years, nobody outside the specialty growing community pushed back on that decision. But the Gros Michel was sold wrapped in tinfoil at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition in 1876. 150 years later, it's still growing, still producing fruit, still tasting the way a banana is supposed to taste. Kept alive not by corporations or governments, but by backyard growers and small farmers, the same people who save heirloom tomato seeds, trade rare fig cuttings over garden fences, and refuse to let a good variety disappear just because the commercial market decided it wasn't worth the trouble. The candy flavor was never the imitation. It was the memory of a fruit the industry threw away. And the grocery store banana is the compromise we've been eating ever since. The original is still out there, growing in someone's yard, waiting for anyone curious enough to taste what a real banana is supposed to be.